I would like to introduce Professor Shannon Walsh, a scholar, an award-winning filmmaker, a writer, and the recipient of prestigious fellowships, including Guggenheim Fellowship in 2020. She is currently an associate professor with the Department of Theatre and Film at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. Being trained as an anthropologist, she has done research on race and politics with focus on South Africa. As a filmmaker, she has done 5 documentaries, and the soon-to-be-released is called Adrian and the Castle. Her documentaries typically look at the issues of social justice, the environment, and techno-utopianism. And today we will devote quite some time to the documentary The Gig is Up. This documentary brings to the fore the topics of gig economy, what it means to get by being a gig worker, power dynamics, and showing how AI is based on human labor.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for organizing this event and for bringing people together on this super important topic. I think it's so crucial that we gather as a community to talk about some of what's happening around technology, because it's going to take all of us, I think, to figure out what the way forward is indeed. As a filmmaker, my creative process, I've been making films since I was a teenager, and I've always been driven by issues of injustice and interested in finding stories that are often unheard. So that's always been something that it has kind of fascinated me in my own work. There's, each film has a really personal connection to me in some way, usually driven by a question that I'm asking about the world around me and what's happening. So there's always, in some ways, even though they're political films, they're also very personal to me. The film that I made just before The Gig is Up was looking at how our techno-utopianism was leading us into environmental crises. And I was very curious about the people at the front lines of that in my film, Illusions of Control. So The Gig is Up really kind of followed through that same thread of thinking about the ways in which technology and humans are interfacing in all of these different ways, and are also kind of idealistic idea of a kind of technology mixed with capitalism that somehow will save us from ourselves, So I think for my creative process, it's really a lot about asking questions, staying curious, and being open to what comes along. And I love collaborating with people and finding interesting characters and telling great stories that I hope can provoke conversation and question and social change. Each film is a lifetime of work. It's like creating a PhD or a book, so along the journey, there's so much that you learn that moves you. And, it's definitely a huge process of self-discovery, of education, of learning and interaction and encounter. With this film, for those of you who have seen it, you'll absolutely know who I'm talking about, which is this character, one of the main characters, Jason, who, I think was one of my favorites. He's a Florida-based gig worker who has a grill of complete gold teeth, and looks the part of a kind of down and out, rural poor white kid from Florida, and talks about guns and tattoos of money on him. When I first met him, he was wearing a Scarface t-shirt, just a real character. And it was just such an incredible journey to meet Jason, because he defied all kinds of expectations of what gig work was, who was doing it. He had a felony. So in the US, a huge amount of gig workers are felons, something I didn't know before this. And that meant that he basically was like cast out of the job market. But what he was actually doing with his life was, taking care of a mother who was sick, just this extremely caring person who had also figured out how to use the algorithms to his benefit, had figured out ways to play the system, really brilliantly smart guy who had a huge heart and was, constantly teaching me things about the world and showing me perspectives I could not have imagined. And, to me, that's the magic of documentary, is always that you get to open a door and walk into a world that, you don't even realize it exists. And it also gets to confront your own expectations of who's doing this kind of work, why are they doing it, and who are they? For example, in this case, some of the film before that, I was, for those of you who might know the philosopher Lauren Berlant, I spent a part of that film following Lauren Berlant, the affect theorist, through the last days of their life after a cancer diagnosis. And they're one of my kind of heroes of philosophy and of theory. And it made me to have this personal connection with someone who had changed my way of thinking about the world through this important moment of life and death for them was totally profound. You would have to have like a whole session just with me telling stories about documentary, because I've been doing it for 20 years. So there's so many stories, but in this film, Jason was one of my favorites. One of the things that isn't in the film that I loved that would interest you guys perhaps is I was able to, after really ducking and diving, find people who worked for Google in Nigeria. They're under NDAs, and in the end, I couldn't show some of what they do. But there are actually people who are sorting the search results by hand for what pops up for you on your Google search results. And he showed me how this works. There's a little piece of him showing like in the film, but he doesn't go into detail that that's what he's doing. And that blew my mind, the extent to which like humans are augmenting so-called AI and other machine learning technology, and will always be, really was something that blew me away. And finding the hidden people in the shadows of the entire tech economy was really startling, that this is what this actually looks like, and it's being sold to us as something totally different. So he really made an impression on me and changed my way of thinking about every time I search for something, who is the person who figured out what a Canadian living in Vancouver or something might want to see first, because that you need a human to figure that out. It's a long, it's experience, and a long-standing amount of learning how to be open, to lean in and listen to people, to take them seriously, to remind them that they're experts in the thing that they do, and that I'm truly curious to absorb and hear that. I mean, I think it's part of the trait that makes me a documentary maker and perhaps an anthropologist as well, is being able to empathetically lean in, and people respond. If they didn't, I probably would have moved on to another profession. But I think it is a particular aptitude over the years. But in general, I think everyone, the thing is that we stop being curious about other people. We think we know what they think, who they are, and we imagine stories about the people around us all the time without actually taking the time to ask them who they are, what they think. And people really enjoy being given the opportunity to share their experience, and I love to hear about it. I'm endlessly curious about all of the incredible little worlds that live inside of all of us and that are all around us every day. Which makes it a pleasure to teach documentary as well, because I think that there's stories everywhere. But it is really a job of being empathetic, I think, and being able to be open and listen to others. And that helps build trust. But I'm sure there's, I think that's it anyways. Yeah, well, I'll just summarize a bit of the film too, just for the people who haven't seen, what we went in with the idea of looking at how technology was impacting labor, specifically in all of these task-based ways. We think about gig work and we're like, oh, it's the same as musicians. It's been marketed to us in this way that it's like part-time occasional work, but actually this kind of knowledge economy and tech-based task-based work is ubiquitous. It's huge. The people that we see, delivering food on bikes and whatnot is a very small portion of it. Most people are behind screens doing the type of day-to-day work that is like transforming our lives. So I was really curious about like, what does that look like all over the world? And I started to find out in the process of making the film that you could pretty much take a dart and throw it at a map and you would find similar conditions of work everywhere. It was actually quite startling to me to see the transformation of the global economy narrowed to the degree that it has through the gig economy. And I mean, the gig economy is sort of like, it's a shorthand, but I know I actually showed this film at IDFA in Amsterdam before. And I remember there's so many people working on this topic. And we were just talking about what do we call it? Because platform is really what the film is focused on, the platform economy. So all the types of jobs that are actually facilitated by platforms. That is where I was drawing my attention. And some of those are mediated, like human machine related dynamics. So yeah, I mean, I went into it understanding, I think like a lot of more average folks that, your everyday Uber drivers, et cetera, were a big part of it. I didn't really realize the depth to which it had transformed the standard of labor globally. And that was what was really striking. It's not piecemeal work. It's being marketed to us as though this is sort of students' part-time work. But in fact, this is what I found through doing it was this is more and more the direction every kind of work under the sun is going. And that is discrete tasks that are paid by the task, mediated by platforms, monitored by platforms, controlled often by technocrats not having human bosses, and everything from legal profession all the way down to somebody filling in the blanks to train AI and delivering your food. And healthcare workers, care work, all of these things are being pushed to the platform. And at a rate that is shocking. So 100 years or more of labor movement, advocacy, activism globally is really getting pushed to the brink with the amount of transformation that's happening right now with almost no public oversight whatsoever. So to me, that was really shocking and worrying, frankly. I think that there's a lot to take account for. At the same time, I don't think it's like, oh, doom and gloom, like at all. I don't believe AI is taking over or any of that. It's like, it's also a great story of human ingenuity, of creativity and global connectedness. The platforms can allow us to do things that we never could have imagined before and harness creative intelligence from all of the corners of the globe where there's an internet connection. That's really exciting, but I think there's just a long road to go before we can actually think about what that type of work needs to look like. And it needs a total rethink of how we consider labor within the societies that we live. So there's a huge job there to do, I think. I mean, Mary Gray, it's a great observation. Mary Gray, who wrote Ghost Work and who is in the film quite a bit. I mean, her big point is like a lot of the engineers and data scientists are just, they don't want to look because probably they're also afraid to like see the corruption of the data and, or like see that people are working in bad conditions. And I think, it was interesting and it depends on, there's such a huge range of types of data that are being done by people, but in Nigeria, I met a lot of people who were tagging AI for AI purposes, doing the data tagging like that. And, one of the characters that's in the film, he's really conscientious. Like he spends really like a lot of creative energy. And, you can see even in the bits in the film, like you can see him thinking about it, using that creative part of human intelligence. And like, there's your perfect candidate in a way, right? Strangely, like this Nigerian guy living in a house with 4 guys is like actually like great. Whereas, Jason in Florida, he is really trying to make a living and he's living in a more expensive place than Lagos. And he's figured out how to game the whole system with surveys. He says he doesn't even read them, for example. He can figure out how to trick it into understand. So, it's not the same as tagging, but nonetheless, like there's a lot of people. So, I mean, there's been safeguards put in on different platforms, and it depends like who's doing what, but there certainly is. I think academics were using MTurk, for example. And I mean, that data, I just don't know what you can get. Not only is it skewed, like you're saying, there, not to mention like the huge amount of felons in the US who are on MTurk or whatever, like, is that that's your general survey population, like probably wouldn't be what you'd pick for a lot of the topics that are being run through these systems, but also the huge amounts of fraud, people claiming, I mean, in the film, I'll give it away for those who haven't seen it, but I love when Jason says, yeah, I'm a Black Republican, because he figured out and he's a white kid with no political affiliation, but he says he's a Black Republican because he says there's a minority of us, so I'll get the surveys, and then they do follow-up surveys with me and follow-up surveys. So you can imagine whatever this political data that they're pulling from this, white kid in Florida who's just totally playing them to get more surveys. So yeah, it really draws into question the reliability of a lot of that stuff for sure. We like the magic, that's the one thing that I really took away, is that we all like the magic of AI, and we want it to be true. Like it's a kind of, there's something very attractive about kind of being able to kind of get beyond human limitations. But I think in reality, this combo of humans and technology is not going away, which is probably a good thing ultimately. But if we're exploiting people in the process or really making corrupt data in the process, I think there are just so many questions to answer still. I mean, I think, part of what we lose in this, and I think I sigh because it's so varied, it's hard to make a generalization like that. But, a lot of people are definitely doing like menial tasks that they don't understand at all. A lot of the people working for AI, one of the things I noticed was that they were constantly like trying to figure out what they were being asked to do, because they're not being told what it's for. So, in the film, Mitchell in Nigeria, there's a really funny scene where he's tagging there's a guy in a bubble bath, and Mitchell thinks that this is for a dating app. I don't think it's for a dating app, but that's what he had told himself to be able to figure out I don't know what it's for either, but it's like you struggle to try to figure out like, what is the meaning of my work? But then, it's also like every second of your time is monitored. So I think like the kind of surveillance element of the way that you work, even if you were doing a creative task, perhaps that you enjoyed. I met people doing, 3D modeling for architects, for example, on Fiverr. And it's not that every job might be horrible. It's that like the sense of community, the downtime, the time that our brains need to just like sit and process, a lot of the other elements that create a rich human life full of meaning in the workplace are definitely getting cut away for efficiency, and for speed and these kind of discrete tasks, as well as all the kinds of protection from health protection, unemployment, time off, breaks, like workday hours, weekends, like everything that you can imagine that's been fought for labor. So that was kind of what I was just talking about. So definitely, I don't think it needs to be this way. It doesn't. Mary Gray really, and she's an anthropologist. She works at Microsoft. She's kind of at an intersection of these areas. And she wrote this book, Ghost Work. I mean, she made me feel, and maybe it's naive to some degree, but to imagine another world as possible, that we could think about task work as actually liberating what we've always wanted to do, which is to have control over our time, which is the reason why most people start doing this type of work, is that you want to take your kid to the ballet recital, you have an ailing parent, you want to have control over when you work and when you don't work. That's awesome. And I think we should want to desire that and have that possible. That's just not what it looks like right now. And I think there is a possible world in which like demands for workers' protections could be built into a platform economy. I think that's a really real possibility. And as Mary Gray also says, like, the time of waiting needs to be paid. You know, in the film, Layla, who is a delivery rider in France, she says, you know, we're standing outside waiting for the delivery to come and we're not getting paid. And, you know, this is time. If we were taxi cabs, we would have the meter running, but we're actually not paid at all for this time. And so like downtime needs to be paid. Like there's a kind of a number of types of systems, and things like people working on multiple platforms, which many people do, aren't able to carry their own digital identity across platforms to show the kinds of work they're doing, their history, like maybe what they've done well. So kinds of, you know, data autonomy for workers, I think could be a really exciting way to think about this differently. I think it just turns upside down. Like I didn't meet anybody, and I often have to say this, I don't meet people doing this type of work who are like, oh God, I wish I was working 9 to 5 for the manager at McDonald's, you know, like nobody likes that work either. You know, you don't also want your schedule controlled by, you know, this arbitrary, you know, that type of system as well isn't really working for people. They do want this type of freedom and autonomy to have like some ability to make decisions about how much they work or don't. And I think that could be a great way forward if we're able to truly grapple with the greed of the platforms right now to exploit people to the end. And I think that's people's power, it's government, it's policymakers, it's legal standards that have to be in place. Right now it's the Wild West, and half of the world doesn't seem to even realize that labor laws are being completely run roughshod. Case after case is in favor of workers, and these companies are just like, we don't care, they move, they just don't follow the judgments. So the methods of accountability for platforms who are really heavily exploiting workers, I think is got to be on the horizon in the next decade. If, you know, and maybe it's blockchain, you know, maybe there's ways in which like some of the new like technology could also help like wrestle back some digital autonomy for workers and be able to put some boundaries on what's happening here. But I think we really need to wake up to the fact that this is happening. That feels really important. I want to say, like, there are companies who out there, like right now, I actually met some of them. One of the guys that's in the film and speaks a little bit. They're a company called Prolific. There are companies that are like making a lot of effort to find fair ways both to pay workers and to control data purity, so to speak, like that we know what we're getting and who we're getting it from. And that also means consistent relationships with people who are on the other side of that transaction. So there's people who are doing this of their own volition, but I definitely think without regulation and strong oversight, I mean, we've seen it before, right? Like that was the early 20th century with children in factories, you know, like, so this push and pull between what workers need and what companies are able to exploit. I think we're at that point right now with platform related work. And the pushback is just, you know, I think a little bit off the radar of where people are at. But, you know, younger people, and I hope, like, I feel like people in your domain here, like, I think you really have a great platform also to bring these issues to light and get people thinking, like smart people who are doing this type of work about how this could look different. Like, I think that it really will come from people working close to the technology, as well as, you know, I don't think legislation is it's not it, you know, like I think we'll have to attack this from multiple sides and yeah, and like decide what kind of world do we want? Do we want, you know, to have, you know, I don't know, like that, to me, there's such big questions, like, do we want our aging parent to be cared for by a task-based care worker? For example, that's a big thing now in Canada. That's happening a lot. Will the medical system become task-based? It could potentially have benefits, but it could also, you know, make it harder and harder for public systems to exist, right? So I think there's such a range of questions. On a good note, like, you know, one story I didn't get in the film, but I love this example in a positive side is, you know, oncologists who are, you know, often they have to look at the slides of cells. Excuse me, I'm not a scientist, so I might be saying this slightly wrong, but to look for cancerous cells, And these slides or whatever x-rays not x-rays, whatever, I guess MRIs can be now looked at with criteria by outsourced workers en masse. You can be reviewing tons of data at the same time and really reduce the amount of time just to look for abnormalities to bring those to the surface. I think that things like that could be, it would be bad if we've got the Jasons of the world faking it, but great if it means that, you can save somebody's life because we catch stuff earlier, because we have the ability for someone who's highly professionalized to be able to share some of the parts of the job in different ways. I guess it could be a bad example or a good one. It depends on your perspective. That's one thing I definitely learned, the human element, no matter, this technology's last mile, or we'll never reach the end of this journey. There will always be a human in the loop, right? Yeah. And the empathetic. Yeah, the empathetic element of feeling like, this is, I just want someone to hear me. We talked earlier about what is it, that's one thing I know from my job is that matters. That's not nothing, to be able to have an interaction. And it's true. I think there's a few things right now with some of the platforms, like the food app platforms, that are just, I think we could collectively agree, today, this has to be outlawed. And one of them, I think, is rating systems, in which people lose their jobs for bad ratings from customers. It's just inhuman to be rating people as humans on their task without knowing. Most of us don't realize that we're actually putting someone's livelihood at risk when we make a rating. That's just wrong. I just don't think, I understand about why you want to know how is the performance of people, but to treat people like objects, to say, is it good or is it bad? It's so dehumanizing, and it has had just devastating impacts on people's livelihoods. So many people have been kicked off platforms for bad ratings. And of course, customers never have the same impact. That one really seems like it. And then putting a human into those systems seems so obvious as well, that there's some interaction that workers can say, hey, this isn't working for me here, there. There's got to be a line of communication, I think, that has some reciprocity. Can we imagine that to happen? I don't know. I think that labor protections, minimum wage, to not have a minimum wage in 2023 for people doing precarious work, it's just, we're going backwards in time. This is slave labor. It's really terrifying that people are working for pennies and for, dollar, we've got, what did she say? I hope I can make 30 euros today if I work 12 hours. It's really shocking. Actually, it's really shocking, the amount of people that are doing this type of work. And so I think it's going to take a bit more than just the human on the other side of the phone, but that would definitely be helpful. It's a whole nother film could be made on platforms in the conditions of not businesses that aren't profitable. This is fourth wave or fifth wave capitalism at its best. It makes absolutely no sense that that these companies, many of them are failing businesses, and yet it boggles the mind. It's quite hard to get your head around in some ways, that the way in which, extremely wealthy people have figured out a way to basically do snatch and grab schemes through venture capitalism, right in front of our noses. And we're going to be holding the, the empty bucket at the end of it going, wait, where did all this go? So that's definitely a huge part of it. And we'll see how that transforms some of the companies in the coming years, whether the shift, I think most of us, you'll hear a lot of chatter now about like Airbnb is like way too expensive. It's more than hotels, and, you know, Uber with the surge pricing, and, you know, and then the workers are making no difference at all in their, you know, with the surge pricing with Uber and such. You know, often they're making less than they were before. So we're starting to see the gouge, right? Someone has to pay for it. And at the moment, it's been workers who are paying for trying to make these companies profitable. So yeah, well, I think that will probably continue. I think a world without apps, unfortunately, is not going to happen. I think that like we have crossed the
I think so too, yeah.
or whatever, right? Like we can't like get off of these damn phones and pushing a button and having something miraculously arrive, that magic. I think I don't know, like maybe this, you know, Gen Z or whatever, I always have faith that they're going to be like, screw this, we're not doing it, you know? But I think there is ways, I mean, locally in Vancouver, and I'm sure there as well, there are lots of local companies who can now build apps that look like Uber, but have a workforce that are employees. Like you can have an app that can order something without it being a platform that is a third party intermediary between multiple levels of folks. So I look for those, like, you know, where possible, to support cooperatives also on platforms. Cooperative platformization is pretty popular. There's people who are getting together, like workers can control the app themselves. You know, we're a bunch of bike riders. Let's make an app. We're going to deliver food all over the city and we'll split all the profits. Like, you know, people are doing that kind of stuff. And I hope that those kind of movements continue to grow, but like co-op movements have always been around and they've never gone huge. But you know, I think as consumers, we can look out for stuff that we don't have to totally sacrifice our like deep desire for convenience by being exploitative to workers. I didn't meet any worker who was like, delete the apps, you know, like nobody's really saying delete the apps. For sure, I give 5 stars to everybody. Like, you know, I'm not gonna rate people's like work. It's not my role and it shouldn't be my role when I've interacted with someone for 10 minutes. But yeah, I think choosing which apps you do use, you know, and then I like some workers' ideas, like I love, which are like, if you're going to download one of these apps like Uber or something, then rate it on the App Store by like, you know, rate the app and then, you know, make in the comments, we're watching, you know, your treatment of workers, or I don't know, make ways to be public about like the fact that these concerns are important around work. Technology, as you guys know, it's like there is, you know, some of it's getting easier and easier. It's more like, are we as consumers willing to take a risk and support like the smaller folks, or are we just too stuck on the big guys that we aren't willing to get out of our comfort zone? But I think it's an element, you know, it's not going to be the answer, I don't think, but it's an element of this kind of bigger picture of the kind of world that we're moving towards now. Or you want to be honest. Yeah. You try to be honest with your rating. Like you're not thinking about, we're actually like inundated with ratings, right? And we're kind of obsessed with ratings, like, you know, rating movies, rating restaurants, reading other people's ratings of product. Like, you know, we're like in a ratings, like Instagram, how many hearts do I have? Like, you know, we're in a rating like frenzy, and we're rating everybody all the time and ourselves. But most of the time our ratings have no huge impact. In this case, people are literally losing their jobs. And of course, it's like a brilliant design, you know, no manager review. All you have is like this outsourced, crowdsourced, you know, you fall under 4 stars and you just get blocked from the app. That's what happens. You just get deplatformed. So I think that's, you know, I did surveys for many years, years and years ago. And I know that, you know, different people rate differently, like, you know, like some people would never give a, you know, 5 out of 5. They'd always say 4, even if they thought it was very good, because that's very exceptional, things like that. And no one, I don't think, is really understanding the huge impact. You know, families, like without food, like really terrible stories that I heard from some of the workers, especially in San Francisco when I was there. And one of the organizers that's in the film, Al, he brings together a lot of those workers come to him that have been deplatformed, and it's just horrifying because there's no one to call. You can't get back on the platform. You don't even know what the problem was. Someone rated you 3, but like, no, now you're just lost your job, and it's just really heartbreaking. I don't actually know. I'm not sure. But I suppose then it probably gives the people who rate badly more power. Yeah. I just don't, I think like we've got to find a way to get to the other side of it. And, I think ratings are, and I think it's a worthwhile point of interrogation for like PhDs, like students and people thinking more heavily about stuff about like the psychological role of ratings in this whole system. I think that there is like really, we've kind of entrenched a sort of dopamine hit through rating things and people and ourselves in a way that I think is really embedded in the tech. And I think that like, what does that mean to our society as a whole and to us as individuals in terms of our happiness and well-being and mental health? And, I think there's big questions behind some of that stuff. These ones are like just really bread and butter, literally issues, right? About where people end up. Well, Prayag Narula, who's in the film, is did a startup. He's like, runs one of the businesses there, and is right like in San Francisco, running with all of those folks. And he decided to run. He spoke to us partially because he also believes that the way workers are being exploited is really bad. And he had like many friends in the tech industry. He was like, oh, be in the, you should talk about your project. But like quickly on, I thought, oh, it'd be great to, interview the head of Uber or whatever. And we did make efforts to do that. But I quickly realized, like, I know exactly what they are going to say. Like, they take up so much space. I don't know what it's like in the Netherlands, but in Canada, it's like, in between this, like sports, there's ads for these delivery apps. Like the amount of money advertising and promotion of their message is absolutely enormous. And, the workers have zero voice. We half the time don't even know anything about any of the people doing this. So it was conscious. Like I was happy to have Prayag and, and Mary too, even though she's not building the stuff, like he's really put a lot of time and thought into what it could look like differently for the workers that work on their platform. But yeah, I mean, I think that the story is pretty, it's pretty well known. This is a benefit. People can leave if they don't want to do it. It's part-time. It's meant for pizza money. Like the story is it's just, we know it. I believe in the good of people. I believe things can change. I believe like that people making startups can choose a different model. Like I think that we need like legal minds in this. I think we need tech people in this. I think we need like government people. Like I think actually it's such a big part of what our future is going to look like that we really need people from all sides. Absolutely, we need to listen to the workers and the people from the grassroots and like hear what's going on with them. But I think there's like so many interlinked elements that it's going to take all of us thinking about this in different ways and building stuff too, that's different. And, I think it'll come on different formats if it's going to change. Like that's my optimistic point of view. My pessimistic is like, we're doomed, like this is so easy. It's so like, boss gets to not even have a name. It's an algorithm that you work for a robot, as far as and it's coming for literally all of our jobs. Like there is not a job from teaching to healthcare to law that is not under threat of platformization. everything can be platformed, especially post-COVID. Like we made this film just at the beginning of COVID is when we finished. And now that so many workplaces have realized that they do not necessarily need to own office space, like take all of that overhead out of the equation, bring in a platformed style workplace, people may well accept it, having been not aware of what's been happening for the last decade in the platforms that exist now in terms of the erosion of all kinds of protections that you take for granted as a worker all over the world, from health protection, to employment insurance and, unemployment insurance. If you get out of work. So I think that it's on the horizon, whether we like it or not. And I think a lot of us, myself included, I'm I'm a professor, but I also have made films and I like my freedom. And I think a lot of us will jump at hey, I can work from home or wherever I want and have okay. And that kind of quick acceptance of what might look like old days contract work into platformization that I think might have a really different feel to it in the years to come if these models continue to grow. So that's my doom and gloom, but my positive is that I think that people ultimately aren't trying to be horrible, and that there are good things that will rise to the surface. We just have to be willing to look for them as consumers, as well as push for them towards government and policymakers and whatnot, and just not accept that people are going to be thrown to the dogs like they're being right now. It's just not right. Yeah, I'm actually, I'm finishing a book on documentary production on the ethics and impact of how to make documentary films. So I'm finishing a book right now, and I'm making a new film that's actually a love story about this, a story about love and grief, actually. It's kind of where I landed up at the end of COVID myself. And I stumbled on this fascinating story of a very interesting couple who built a 62-room castle in rural Illinois, dedicated each room to their love. And when she died, he ended up locked away in this castle on his own. And we're working with him to create a fantastical fairy tale musical exploring their love story as he copes with his grief. So it's a very different kind of film, not a tech doc whatsoever, but one that kind of feels really resonant out of the times that we're in, and is going to be, it's going to be quite a journey. It's very, very fun, very maximalist, and I think a little bit of breath of fresh air. I think we all need a bit of love, a little bit of healing in the times that we've been through. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we need to fight and think about, but I also feel like, we need to keep ourselves whole as humans. And this film actually really reminded me of how just important human connection is to everything we do and to the meaning that we make of our lives. The last story I'll leave you with is one of the things also not in the film was in India, all of these workers, they're totally separated. You don't know where anybody else is working when you're on the computers, but they found a way through Reddit to figure out who else was working on this. And then in their different homes, they would just leave their phones off the hook, so that people could hear and chat with each other as though they were in a collective workplace. And it just, to me, reflected the fact that we need each other, we need connection, and that is such an essential part of a meaningful life and of meaningful work. And the isolation that's been happening through some of the platforms is part of, I think, one of the things that is going to erode it. But yeah. Yeah, the flowers grow through the pavement, right? So we always find a way to find each other once again. That's one thing that seems to stand the test of time. So we need to keep optimistic and keep working towards a better future, I think.